In this lesson, I'd like to start by talking about one of the two ways that you can incorporate switching into your GNS3 simulated network topology. Because chances are, I'm guessing that if you're studying your CCNA, NP, or anything else, you're going to need to be able to practice switching along with that. Now, as far as switching is concerned, there's two basic ways to do that. There's several advanced ways using L2, IOU, and other stuff I'm not going to get into in this series. But there's two basic ways that you can do that if you're sort of a new or intermediate GNS3 user. One is to use what's called the built-in switch node, and the other is to import in a router that acts like a switch, called an ether switch. So in this particular video, I'm going to be focusing in on the first one, the built-in switch node. So let's talk a little bit about that. So here is my GNS3 topology, and in this particular case, it's already fully functioning and built, and I've used a built-in switch node. So this is what the built-in switch node looks like, and where you would get that from is from right here in the device nodes section. This section right here is where you find your switches. So here's the various routers that are available to you, and here's where you find your various layer 2 switches. And the Ethernet switch is the one that we're going to be focusing in on today. And you can just drag and drop that just like anything else. Now the Ethernet switch, if you choose to use that, one of the nice things about that is, like I said, it's a built-in node built into GNS3. So it doesn't require any iOS. It actually is not even configured via a command line at all. You just configure it via a very basic GUI. Now this built-in switch node, like I said, very basic device. Really the only thing you're ever going to want to use it for is one of two things. Either segmenting your network into different VLANs, or, I guess it could be an and, using 802.1q trunking. So those are really the only two things. This built-in switch node does not do anything else. It does not do any of the Cisco stuff like DTP or VTP or CDP, none of that. As a matter of fact, these switching nodes don't even do spanning tree. So be very careful about that, because if you actually do put two or more of them in your topology and you connect them together, you can very quickly create a bridging loop, because there's nothing to prevent the bridging loop. There is no spanning tree in here. So that is something to be wary of. So in this particular environment, I'll go ahead and get rid of it just by right-clicking on it and then selecting delete, because I don't need that one. In this particular case, all I'm doing is I've got 4 PCs which are segmented into 2 different VLANs, a VLAN for payroll and a VLAN for human resources. And maybe what I want to do, maybe the objective of this lab was simply to practice the router on a stick. So I didn't really care about practicing the switch. I just wanted to practice how to create a router on a stick for the router. So maybe that was my objective. Now in this particular case, all of this is already up. The router has already been pre-configured. And what I want to do is show you, how did I get to this point? How did I get this switch in here? And how did I configure it in such a way that 2 of its interfaces, these 2 right here, would be in one VLAN, like VLAN 1. And these 2 interfaces right here would be in a completely different VLAN. And this interface right here was 802.1q. Because that's what was necessary in order to make this topology work. So how did I do it? All right, so let's go back a little bit and start by getting rid of the switch. Right-click it, select delete. Yes. And when I delete it, all the links it had to various devices are also deleted. Okay, so let's go back into here and open up my switching section. There we go. And I'll drag and drop my Ethernet switch into the topology. All right, so there it is. And notice that as a built-in node, the moment you drag and drop it, notice over here on the right how it's already green. So it's already on, it's already activated. There's no shutting down of this particular device. It's just always there. Okay, so now if I right-click on it, remember this doesn't have any kind of command line. So the way you would actually configure its interface is by selecting the configure option, the very first option. So as you can see, what it comes up with by default are 8 interfaces, all of which are static access ports, all of which are in VLAN 1. If I want to add a new interface, you can see it's already set up and ready to go. So if I click the add button, it will add interface number 9 or port number 9. It'll be an access port and it'll be in VLAN 1. So boop, there we go. Now if I want to add another interface, interface number 10, maybe I want that to be in a different VLAN, so you can just change that, hit add, boop, there you go again. Maybe I want to add a new interface, interface 11, and I want it to be 802.1q, so you can see your options here from the drop-down menu. Now when I make this as an 802.1q port, the VLAN referenced here is going to be the native VLAN. So I might not want VLAN 5 as the native VLAN for my 802.1q trunk, so I'll set that back down to 1. And you can see here how it's been created. So adding new interfaces, pretty easy. I've actually read that this switch can support like up to 10,000 VLANs, some crazy number. Now, what if you want to modify an existing port? That you cannot do. So for example, first of all, you have to double click on a port to select it. Double click, double click. And if I wanted to change port number 1 to be an access port in VLAN 2, you might think, okay, we'll just change that and then hit apply. But look, nothing happened. It's still an access port in VLAN 1. It didn't change anything. Similarly, if I want to change one of these existing ports into an 802.1q trunk, that wouldn't work. So what's the moral of this story? Well, if you want to take an existing port and change its characteristics, you have to delete it first. So I'm just going to delete everything. I'm going to start with port number 1 and delete everything that's in there. Okay, all the ports are gone. And now for the purposes of my topology, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have ports 1 and 2 leading to these two PCs in VLAN 1. I'll have ports 3 and 4 leading to these PCs in VLAN 2. And then I'll have port number 5 as an 802.1q trunk. So once again, right click and select configure. So port number 1 is already by default going to be an access port in VLAN 1. So I'll just hit add. Port number 2, I'll just add that. That's okay. Now port number 3, before I create it, that's the key. Before you create it, I'm going to change the VLAN to 2. Add it. Port number 4, I also want to be in VLAN 2. So add it. And by the way, you can also see right here that you could change the name of the switch if you wish. And then port number 5, I'm going to have that as an 802.1q port, and I'm going to have the native VLAN as 1. And then hit apply, and then OK. So now it's ready. Another way that you can verify if you're taking a look at a switch, an Ethernet switch, and you wonder how it's configured, all you have to do is hover over it. So put your mouse over it, hover there, and then it'll tell you. Now, in this particular case, it's saying the ports are empty because it's not connected to anything yet. So once I actually connect those ports to something and then I hover over it, I'll actually see a lot more stuff. I'll see if it's trunking, I'll see if it's in a VLAN, I'll see all that. So let's do that next. So now I'm going to go to my connect or add a link tool. Just click that. All right, so I'll select port number 1. I'll just click on port 1, and then I'll go over here to my first PC and select his Ethernet. Select port number 2. Go to my second PC, and I'll just keep doing that for the remaining PCs. And notice in this particular lab, I'm using another built-in node, the Virtual PC Simulator. Not going to talk about that in great detail right now. We'll get into that in a subsequent video. And then lastly, we'll take port number 5, which has already been pre-configured as a trunk, and connect it to Fast Ethernet 01 on my switch, on my router, that is. Deselect the link tool, because I don't want to add any more links. Some of the stuff looks kind of messy, but what's nice is I can drag this stuff around to make it a little bit more easily visible. So if for some reason I want to take a screenshot of this, or just for my own benefit, I can actually read it a little bit easier. And let's just move the name of the switch down here. And now we should be good to go. Now in this particular case, the router is already pre-configured. And now if I hover over the switch at this point and zoom in there, now you can see, for example, port 1 is access mode in VLAN 1, port 3 is in access mode VLAN 2, and port 5 is .1q with a native VLAN of 1. And it tells you what it's connected to. So that's sort of a nice way to get a status update on the device. Everything is green right now, so let me go into one of my virtual PCs and make sure it's got an IP address. And it does. Let's see if he can ping his counterpart, PC2, who's also in the payroll department. not reachable. Okay, so let's check PC2. Show IP. All right, so he does have the correct IP address. Actually, I have seen this before where everything is set up correctly, but they're not pingable. And what I've had to do in this particular situation actually is, before I disconnect, I want to save my configuration on the PCs. Close this. And what I've seen that I have to do to make this work is basically to shut everything down. So click the Stop All Devices button up here. And you can see that stops everything but the switch. And now turn everything back on again. Let's go back into my PC. Show IP. He still has his IP address. Now let's see if he can ping the other PC in the same VLAN. And it works. Not sure why I have to take that extra step, but in this particular case it was necessary to stop and restart everything. And so that's the basics of the Ethernet switch. Real simple. And you can see, once again, just right-click it, hit Configure, and then you can modify the various ports. Now, as you can see, there's a few other options available to you here when you right-click, such as change the host name, which is something we're all able to do in that GUI. Change the symbol. If you want to change it from this switch to one of the other switch types, you can. Capture, if I selected this, I could actually do a Wireshark capture, and it would first prompt me for what interface I want to capture on. And then, once it started, every packet going in and out would be displayed in Wireshark. And I'll go ahead and do that in a subsequent video where I focus exclusively on Wireshark interaction with this. And raising and lowering one layer, we've already talked about that when I talked about adding circles or adding squares into your topology. And then, of course, there is delete. So that concludes this particular section on the built-in switch node. In the next section, we're going to look at actually dragging and dropping a router that has a special module in it called the EtherSwitch module. And that's going to be useful for you if you actually want to practice iOS switching commands like spanning tree, trunking, port fast, and a range of other stuff. So we'll see that in the next video.